F-15E with a optically guided bomb. And you see as it gets closer, General Clark showed one similar to this today. This is a different building. Good accuracy. And once again, although that's not a BDA picture, I think you can make your own conclusion of whether that building's still in good shape. Pristine Army barracks, continue to take down his fielded forces. F-16, and I'll show you the weather is coming and going. Right after he drops the bomb, you can see that the clouds cover the target. So they're working in and around the weather. It's very difficult. The last one is the MiG-21 aircraft at Ponikva Airfield that's in central Serbia, central Fry. You see the MiG-21 right under the cursors. This was yesterday. Full of fuel, so you can see it's destroyed. So the full variety of weapons, not weapons, but targets are being struck as we speak. Yesterday,
flames rise into the Kosovo sky in the aftermath of yet another NATO airstrike last night. This is how the alliance is trying to break the will of Slobodan Milosevic. Yet there's been almost 3 weeks of this, and it still isn't clear if the strategy is working. It's thought he wants more strike aircraft like these F-15 Eagles at their base in Italy today. They can operate in all weather conditions, and radar jamming planes like these Prowlers, because the Serb air defences still haven't been overcome.
Positions close to the Kosovo border.
The army is on a heightened state of alert, and as news of a big new troop deployment came, we were being taken by helicopter to positions close to the Serbian border. There are almost 12,000 NATO troops in Macedonia. For now, their role is said to be purely defensive. Camouflaged in the hills close to Serbia, these are the forward emplacements of the Royal Artillery. The big guns are the Army's newest acquisition and are within easy range of Serb positions just 10 kilometers away. So if there is an incursion here, you'll be able to respond pretty quickly?
Yes, we can, immediately. Day, night, all visibility, we'll be able to react. The men are on immediate notice to move, immediate notice to fire at all times throughout the day and night.
The local villagers here are ethnic Albanians. Albanians make up 25% of Macedonia's population, and they welcome NATO. In this tent on the hillside, village children were watching television with the troops. The film was Braveheart. But NATO forces are meeting strong resentment among the majority Macedonian population. Troops report verbal abuse and bricks and bottles have been thrown at them. The Macedonians are worried that NATO's war against Serbia will ignite a wider Balkan conflict. And the Macedonians have strong cultural links with the Serbs. On the streets of the capital, Skopje, we heard strong condemnation of NATO. They're against our brother Serbs, and we feel we're betraying our brother Serbs by having them here, this woman said. NATO is well aware of the problems such sentiments could cause for the Macedonian government. The fear is that any ground war launched from here could spark serious violence inside Macedonia itself. And so NATO troops deployed here now, and those due to arrive from Britain, will, it's stressed, only move into Kosovo when a peace agreement allows them to.
I've got to stick to what I came here to do and what my present mission is, and I think you know that, but I will, for the avoidance of doubt, just remind you that it is to be prepared to take a peace implementation force into Kosovo as the result of an agreed settlement.
But NATO is mounting continuous reconnaissance work from here. These German troops are set to launch a surveillance rocket carrying cameras. It's tasked to photograph Serb positions across the border. The rocket, called a drone, eventually comes back, carrying what the Germans hope will be images of the Serb military. In fact, it photographed these tanks near a Kosovo-Albanian village. In this new European conflict, the enemies from an old war are now valued allies. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Macedonia.
Ammo dumps, but it's not nearly enough. So the U.S. and its allies plan to commit several hundred more aircraft, bringing the total to 1,000. That will require the president to start calling reservists to active duty.
There may need to be a call-up for that would include pilots to fly some of the tankers. Many of the tankers are flown by reservists.
So far, airstrikes have destroyed 11 bridges to cut the military supply lines. But
that still may be a long way off. Today, NATO troops in Tirana continue preparing for a humanitarian mission called Operation Allied Harbor. 8,000 NATO troops will soon be part of that mission.
I'm creating a task group that will deal with shelter for the refugees, and another task group that will deal with the distribution of the
military force can be without its weaponry, and the British contingent already installed there, soon to be joined by another 1,800 troops, has artillery and anti-aircraft missiles, which will have the task of protecting the peacekeeping force against the Yugoslav army, should the need arise.
We're deployed here in line with a perceived threat. The Serbs have a known capability in both fixed wing and helicopters. We are a defensive system, and at the moment the main effort of our force here is force protection.
Reports of a Yugoslav military incursion across Kosovo's border into Albania are now regarded as fact, and today
suggested that if Serb forces began to retreat from Kosovo, then NATO might suspend bombing for 24 hours. The White House reacted sharply. No deals before victory.
There's still more demand than supply. Technology and generosity have so far kept people alive and kept a humanitarian crisis from turning into a disaster. But the refugee problem here is approaching a crucial stage, the point at which a short-term crisis becomes a long-term condition.
Ordered to leave the camps they set up. Unlike in Albania, where NATO is stepping up its humanitarian role, Allied forces in Macedonia are handing responsibility to the government and to the international aid community now assembled on Macedonian soil. For the moment, NATO says its troops have done enough.
We've made a lot of friends, but there may be another time when we've got to come back, so we've got to harden our hearts now and get on with another job, because maybe we have to come back to another camp and perhaps start all over again.
But planes are flying, the bombs are dropping. Whatever that's costing, there is no question Congress will pay it. Everything else is open to question from foe and friend alike.
The United States and the rest of NATO were clearly unprepared. The debacle that has unfolded.
A reliable Clinton ally, Vermont Democrat Patrick Leahy, supports the U.S.-NATO mission, but he is pointedly unhappy with how it's being carried out.
The administration needs a more realistic strategy. We need policy based on solid plans, not policy based on polls.
While such criticisms will not stop Congress from funding the war in Kosovo, there is an inextricable link between the questions and the bottom line.
He needs to give us, first of all, the estimate of what that cost is going to be, why we're there, when we're going to get out, and what are the situations or objectives that allow us to get out of there. So we need to have that honest evaluation.
Cost estimates are difficult to come by and even harder to stick to.
Well, I'm learning that all numbers rise, so I think there's a good chance that it'll be more than $4 billion. Every day we delay in sending it up, it rises.
$4 billion is a mind-boggling figure, but war is hell, and it's not cheap. A single Tomahawk missile is about $1 million. A laser-guided bomb estimated at about $50,000. But by far, the biggest outlay comes under the initials O&M, operations and maintenance. Some planes cost $5,000 an hour to fly. Every plane needs fuel and a support team, pilots, repairmen, ground crews, people to feed the crews, places to house them, and on and on. $4 billion is a lot of money. Experts say it may suffice for now.
If we just continue with the air campaign at its current pace, and it lasts a matter of several months, perhaps at most, that may be enough money. But again, if it goes to a ground war where we're really trying to forcibly push the Serbs out of Kosovo, it could be much more costly.
Experts figure a ground war could push the tab into the $10 billion range.
The U.S. and its NATO allies will soon have in place a military force capable on short notice of moving into Kosovo to return refugees to their homes and keep the peace. The allies are also intensifying diplomatic efforts, including subtle but important shifts in Western demands designed to make an agreement more likely. On the military side, the Allies are pouring more aircraft, up to 1,000, into the Balkans. NATO has a force of almost 12,000 troops on the ground in Macedonia and another 1,700 in Albania. More troops are just over the horizon in Greece, Italy, and Germany. If necessary, NATO could call upon another 20,000 international troops still deployed next door in Bosnia.
Every morning, as President Milosevic wakes up and realizes that in the last 24 hours he has become weaker, he also sees that NATO is becoming stronger.
Most of the troops in the Balkans are equipped and armed for humanitarian missions, not combat ones. But combat planes and helicopters are on their way now. After
With NATO's air armada in Operation Allied Force about to be bolstered by some 300 more U.S. planes, the Pentagon will dip into the reserves for help.
There will be a reserve call-up that will involve primarily Air Force people and some Army people to fill in specialties that exist only or primarily in the reserves.
Air Force reservists will man a complement of air refueling planes to help sustain an intensified bombing campaign against Serb targets. Another 33 U.S. KC-135 and 5 KC-10 refueling tankers have already been authorized for use in the operation. Each requires a crew of 4. Also expected to be activated for duty in Macedonia and Albania, a number of Army citizen soldiers who specialize in civil affairs. A former Defense Department official says it is a normal part of any extended U.S. military mission.
The reserves are like an insurance policy that when you have a crisis, you call your insurance agent and you bring them in to fill in the gaps.
230,000 reservists were activated for Operation Desert Storm against Iraq in 1991. Close to 500 Air Force reservists are today helping monitor the northern and southern no-fly zones over Iraq. About 18,000 Army Reserve and National Guard troops have served stints in Bosnia since late 1995 as NATO peacekeepers. Even now, 500 Air Force Reserve volunteers are flying combat support for missions in the Balkans, along with humanitarian relief flights. But a call-up always entails political risk, and that could prompt new debate over the action against Yugoslavia.
Once you call up reserves, it is a signal to the country that this is a serious operation because you're calling people's neighbors now.
The administration is expected to announce the size of the authorized call-up by the end of the week.
And that also may be involved in this. Now, this is some footage of overnight strikes. This is in Rakovica, near Belgrade. It's a Belgrade suburb where you see NATO attacks continuing even into the night tonight, despite the tragic incidents of yesterday. A number of targets hit, a couple of television towers knocked down in a nearby city, the town of Kachak, and Serb television also showed explosions rocking an area near the Yugoslav village of Vrelek, and warplanes also hit more targets in the town of Kosovo. So
Yugoslav jets from flying, despite making planes, hangars, and airports priority targets. This cockpit video from Tuesday shows MiG-21s at the Pristina airfield. One is taken out in a direct hit from a laser-guided bomb dropped by a U.S. F-16.
Pentagon sources say
this is an army whose soldiers can't call home because Kosovo is their home, and most of these soldiers say they do not know if their families are dead, alive, or are refugees. But they say that is why they fight, to return home. And this week, CNN was granted an exclusive look into their struggle.
The army is from Serbs.
This army was formed spontaneously, says one KLA commander. We are freedom fighters. We want to fight for freedom, nothing else, he says. The KLA claims to have opened a significant infiltration route along the Kosovo-Albanian frontier and to control significant territory in southwest Kosovo. A steady stream of KLA soldiers moving into Kosovo gave weight to their claim. So too do stockpiles of weapons and ammunition stored along their infiltration routes. This is the 4th Brigade, 100 men born in Jakova, Kosovo, but most of them left Jakova years ago to study or work abroad, or to escape arrest because they were suspected of being KLA sympathizers. Members of this unit left homes in England, Switzerland, Germany, and Italy to come here to fight. This soldier is a civil engineer who was working in London until war broke out.
Do you think you will ever be able to go back and live in your country?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so, and I hope so. We must go in my country and to live there until my country can be free.
As we followed them along their infiltration route, the 4th Brigade evaded sporadic artillery fire from nearby Yugoslavian forces. A shattered farmhouse, sometimes used by the KLA, is evidence of the shelling, which the KLA claims has become less effective due to NATO airstrikes. Yugoslav army snipers also constantly harass. Here, the KLA scramble into combat positions after a sniper fired into their camp. But bad weather is an equally formidable foe. Cold rain and fog reduce the effectiveness of Yugoslav snipers and artillery. But it also makes life miserable for a foot-bound guerrilla army that must walk miles through mud to reach their objectives. Exhaustion, too, is a problem. Thousands of Kosovars have joined, according to the KLA, since the NATO airstrikes began. But this force is undermanned and lightly equipped. Still, the 4th Brigade, crossing into Kosovo, maintains that theirs is a one-way trip back to their homeland. There are two choices, they say: win back Kosovo or die trying.
Of the Cold War spent 25 years watching vigilantly for Soviet missiles. There is evidence of a changing mission for U.S. Space Command.
If you would ask the folks engaged in Kosovo today what kind of support they're getting from space, our warfighters over there would be very positive about that support. A big change from 1991.
In 1991, during the Persian Gulf War, military strategists learned some hard lessons about how to use space assets in the post-Cold War world. For example, the Intercontinental Missile Defense System was not nimble enough to give ground troops timely warning of a Scud missile attack. That's why Space Command created this operations center at Schriever Air Force Base nearby. The 11th Space Warning Squadron uses infrared satellites that detect hotspots to see and then warn friendly forces in harm's way in less than 30 seconds.
This is alert. Stand by for missile launch reports. Stand by for missile launch reports.
Busy is the operative word at the place they call the SPOC, the Space Operations Center at Peterson Air Force Base. The team here gives field commanders instant status reports on 600 military satellites. Information on the predicted accuracy of the global positioning system can be used to time attacks by GPS-guided cruise missiles.
If it's going to be a sustained operation, I would recommend 600 down to about 0930 Zulu on the 9th.
It's just like being in a good old fist fight. The guy that can hit the fastest will probably win.
Satellite contact, free pass, 1-8. Step 2, listen up.
The 2nd Space Operations Squadron controls the 27-strong GPS constellation. By giving the Pentagon a picture of who and what is where, GPS has helped clear the fog of war, in addition to improving the accuracy of weapons.
We used to have to drop over 3,000 bombs to hit one target. Now we can drop one bomb and hit one target.
Because of GPS?
Because of GPS.
Much of the information on the location of U.S. military satellites used for communications, navigation, and weather was widely available to the public. It was posted on a website operated by NASA. But in February, the military pulled the plug.
We know there are nations that are working on laser dazzlers that can blind satellites, so if you know where they are, then you know how to target them.
At U.S. Space Command, they know they hold the high ground, and no one else comes close. But just the same, they're taking no chances, as these assets in space gain greater value on disputed ground.
For science and technology, and making positive identification are not easy. Reference materials can often be sketchy at best, and even the most experienced pilot has a difficult and dangerous task.
Well, the real problem is that you're traveling at, say, 400 miles an hour. You may, in some of these aircraft, be 3 miles high. You may be releasing your weapons 10 miles away. You've got to look through a small sight to try and identify the convoy. You've also got to be worried about the air defense systems that are probably attacking you. You've got to take evasion maneuvers. And in all of this, you've got to make sure that you're identifying the correct target, you're getting the weapon on the right place, and you're not going to cause any civilian casualties.
In air operations over Kosovo, NATO planners rely on a host of high-technology instruments: space-based satellites, high-flying reconnaissance aircraft, and reports from ground observers. But even trained observers make mistakes. In Kosovo, there are Yugoslav aircraft flying, as well as NATO types. In combat conditions, this cannot be replicated in training.
If you're on the ground with an aircraft coming over, it's quite a difficult thing to identify what sort of aircraft it is, even when you're not being attacked. If you've got bombs raining down or bullets firing at you, the last thing you think about is trying to take the aircraft number that's going over.
But ultimately, it's the attacking pilot who makes the decision. And that's why NATO is keen to have US Army Apache attack helicopters in the Balkans. Their high-tech systems can identify vehicles from 5 miles. And hidden in trees or behind hills, the pilots have time to make a positive identification. But for all that, military air action is still an imperfect art.
To the bombs, that is, drop their unguided 1,000-pound and cluster bombs in bad weather because of the increased possibility they could miss their targets. and they could not fly below clouds because that would put them at risk from anti-aircraft fire.
When you're given the task and something gets in the way, say for example the weather, with the type of operation that you're intending to carry out that day, it is frustrating when you have to report back to the higher authority that you weren't able to achieve the task that they set you.
Once they got better navigational equipment, the British pilots also got authorization to drop their unguided weaponry on some missions. But they still stay high. NATO will not say how high exactly, but from dozens of conversations with air crewmen and from details about the mistaken attack on the Kosovo refugees, it seems clear that for the most part, pilots are flying above 15,000 feet or 5,000 meters to stay out of range of anti-aircraft fire. And as that accident also made clear, despite precision-guided weapons, bombing from high altitudes may not be as precise as low-level attacks. As well, bombing the very people NATO is trying to help pointed to a kind of military truism.
The number of mistakes is proportional to the volume of the air operation and the difficulties that are encountered.
And that raises another challenge for the airmen, the question of fatigue in a mission without a definite end. While all NATO members restrict the length of time combat crews can spend in the air, many of the pilots involved in the air war are now flying 3 or 4 times as much as they do in training, with the additional stress of actual combat. While those involved in the attack on the refugee convoy have not been identified, no one here at Aviano, where many of the raids against Yugoslavia are being launched, would have welcomed the news that NATO was responsible for the deaths of the refugees.
I feel very sorry for all those folks. And just sad to see, no one wants to see people die, but we understand that's part of what this business entails.
Jim Bitterman, CNN, Aviano, Italy.
After a wave of NATO fighters could be seen streaming across the border. Weather conditions were good, and smoke from ground targets was clearly visible rising in the sky east of the town of Jakovica.
That had been set on fire. It looked like it had been burning for quite a long time and was about to burn out. Then as I moved further south, I see the next village south on fire, pressure fire, still burning vigorously.
In an audio recording describing what he saw from an altitude of 15,000 feet, the pilot gives new meaning to the antiseptic satellite photos of burned out villages.
I see another house that has just been set ablaze, and I spot a 3-vehicle convoy. They come to a stop at the next house down the road, and I'm convinced now they're preparing to set this next house on fire.
Armed with laser-guided bombs, he moves in for the attack.
I make several passes over these vehicles to ensure that they are, in fact, military vehicles. I make a decision at that point that these are the people responsible for burning down the villages that I've seen so far.
Although NATO frequently shows gun camera video of direct hits by laser-guided bombs, the video of this attack has not yet been released. The pilot drops one bomb, then, still unaware that these vehicles are in fact tractors pulling refugees, calls in another plane to continue the attack.
He now spots 3 large trucks in the middle of the compound next to where we had just attacked.
This is what a single bomb did to that compound. Serb TV
was seen in the Montenegrin capital Podgorica. Serbia's smaller partner has been mainly off limits because it stayed out of the conflict. But with the Yugoslav military there targeting NATO jets, the alliance appears to have decided it has to act again. A more regular target has been the northern Serbian city of Novi Sad. Serbian television has broadcast pictures of what was said to be the latest attacks. Reports have spoken of the oil refinery there being pounded again, the 4th time it has come under fire.
By long periods of bad weather, which forced many aircraft to turn back rather than risk missing their targets, the alliance has been keen to step up its attacks on military targets in Kosovo. But the strategy of bombing from a safe height inevitably increases the risk of hitting the wrong targets. If the Serbs are using civilians as human shields, as NATO has suggested, the risks are, of course, even greater. Jim Fish, BBC News.
Time pilots lift off on their missions, they confront 3 potentially contradictory priorities: to hit their targets, to avoid civilian damage, and to reduce risks that they could get shot down. sometimes those rules can make their lives very complicated. For the first 2 weeks of the bombing campaign, for instance, Royal Air Force pilots were forbidden to, quote, bomb through the clouds. That is, drop their unguided 1,000-pound and cluster bombs in bad weather because of the increased possibility they could miss their targets. And they could not fly below clouds because that would put them at risk from anti-aircraft fire.
When you get
a transport plane on Thursday to land at the tiny Albanian airport at Rinas, situated some 30 kilometers from the capital, Tirana. Many more flights are expected to follow. The only serviceable airport in the country, Rinas is bursting at the seams. Normally it